On today's live broadcast stream, I will be predicting and previewing the main card for UFC 212 this weekend from Brazil. It's going to be shown live on pay-per-view this Saturday, June 3rd. In addition to the show being here on Facebook, as I mentioned, it is on YouTube as well. So head to YouTube afterwards, later this afternoon. I will have an interview with one of the competitors from UFC 212, that being Marlon Moraes. Moraes will be making his UFC debut after having a very successful run in World Series of Fighting, where he was their bantamweight champion. He will be making his debut against top 5 competitor in the weight class in Rafael Assuncao. Very excited for that matchup, and I'll get to that fight here in just a second, as that will be the featured prelim on Fox Sports 1. Speaking of some of the other prelims shown on FS1 as well as the Fight Pass, the prelim, or I guess the featured Fight Pass fight, that's going to be Jamie Moyle against Viviane Pereira, and that's going to be on Fight Pass. Those fights are going to kick off at 6:30 in the East, 3:30 in the West here in the United States. Also, Marco Beltran will take on Davison Figueiredo. I probably said that completely wrong. I apologize. And we're also going to see Jim Wallhead take on Luan Chagas. That's also going to be on the Fight Pass portion of the card. Looking at the FS1 prelims, early Alcantara will take on Brian Keller. We're also going to see Johnny Eduardo against Matthew Lopez, Antonio Carlos Jr. against Erik Silva, and the aforementioned Rafael Assuncao against Marlon Moraes. Now, I want to talk about that fight here just a minute. I think this is a tremendous fight. I've been looking forward to seeing Marlon compete inside the octagon for quite a while now. It was pretty apparent in World Series of Fighting that no one could really touch this guy, and it's going to be interesting to see him fight someone perceived at his same level in Rafael Assuncao. Of course, Assuncao, the biggest victory of his career, coming over TJ Dillashaw a few years ago, then kind of had a host of injury problems, had really trouble getting back into the octagon after that victory, was able to return with 2 more victories after Dillashaw beating Pedro Munoz and Brian Caraway, but then, like I said, had trouble staying in the octagon, was out for nearly 18 months before rematching TJ Dillashaw at UFC 200. You could tell he just wasn't quite at that level that we had saw a few years before, and then in his fight against Aljamain Sterling, won the fight. Yes, it was a very close fight. I think both will agree that it wasn't really a great fight from either of them, but Assuncao did come out of that one victorious. But if Assuncao wants to beat Marlon Moraes, I think he has to fight way better than he has been his last 2 outings. He's definitely looked somewhat pedestrian, a little slower to the punch, and we're not seeing quite those combinations or willingness to strike. And really, we haven't even seen much of his ground skills. We saw a little bit against Sterling, but this is a guy that does have 10 submission victories. So this is a guy that's a very accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner, and we haven't really seen that as of late. And really, he hasn't got a submission victory since 2003. So it's been a while since we've really seen him use those skills, and I feel like that could be an area that he could exploit against Marlon Moraes, because Moraes is a very excellent striker. For those of you who have seen him in the World Series of Fighting, know that this is a dude that has incredible leg kicks, is incredibly fast, has power, and can go 25 minutes, no problem. So that is a big deal in this fight. Now, luckily for Assuncao, it's only 15 minutes, but this is a dude who has great conditioning. He comes from a great camp there in New Jersey. Frankie Edgar, Edson Barboza, Eddie Alvarez, just to name a few, coming out of there with Mark Henry and Renzo Gracie and Ricardo Almeida out there in New Jersey. So this is a guy that is ready for the big time, and I think this is going to be his coming out party. And if you're a casual fan, maybe you don't know Marlon Moraes, you don't really follow anything else but the UFC, that's fine. But you look at the rankings, you think, oh, who's this unranked guy taking on the number 3 guy in the world? But realistically, Marlon Moraes is a top 5 guy in the world in this weight class, in my opinion. And I think most would agree of that. So on paper, according to the UFC, this looks like a huge mismatch, but it's not. And I'm very excited for Marlon Moraes to come to the UFC. I'm also very excited to speak with him later this afternoon. So to catch that interview with Marlon Moraes, head over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. About 3 p.m. Eastern, that's 12 in the West, that interview will be available for you to check out, and I will also put it on the page here as well. And for those of you that want to watch the show afterwards, of course, it's going to be here on the page. But if you prefer to listen to an audio version, Beyond the Cage is also available on iTunes and Google Play. Search those stores in the podcast section, and they will pop up for you. Let's get to the main card here for UFC 212. I'm going to preview it first and then go ahead with my picks for the 5 main card fights. Going to start off in the welterweight division as Erik Silva will take on Yancy Medeiros. Now, Yancy Medeiros used to fight at 155, has since moved up to 170, and so far, moving up to 15 pounds, the man from Hawaii has looked pretty good. I believe he is he's 1-0, actually, at 170. His first appearance at that weight class was against Sean Spencer at UFC 203, where he ended up winning by rear naked choke. His striking looked really crisp in there. You could tell that he wasn't drawn out. This looked like a guy that could strike for 15 minutes and obviously still had a lot of power. And Sean Spencer is a very solid individual and no slouch either. And I think this jump up in weight is very good for Medeiros, who was definitely one of the bigger lightweights. And believe it or not, actually Medeiros, a couple points in his career, actually did fight, I believe, at 185 pounds. So I think this is actually more of his natural weight here at 170. And this is a kid that can really get it done in a lot of different facets. Of his 13 victories, he has 10 finishes, 6 knockouts, 4 submissions, only 3 decisions. A lot of people, he's trained with the Diaz brothers there in Stockton. He has a little Diaz brothers-esque style there with the Stockton slam. A very creative striker, really good kicks, even though he gives up a little bit of height and reach advantage that he had at 155. I think he's still a very long and lanky individual, even at 170, officially listed at 5'10", and does have a reach of 75 inches. So he'll be giving up 2 inches in height to the veteran Erik Silva, who will have a slight reach disadvantage, 74 inches for the Brazilian. 19-7 coming into this fight. Of his 19 victories, 12 are by submission. And after good victories and spectacular finish victories over Mike Rhodes and Josh Koscheck, a little bit of tough times lately for the Brazilian as he's lost to Neil Magny, Norib Tallin. However, he was able to bounce back, defeating Luan Chagas at UFC Fight Night 95, submitting him in the 3rd round. However, for Erik Silva, 32 years old, he always seems like a guy that can beat kind of the mediocre, maybe slightly below UFC talent, but anytime he's really been challenged in the UFC with a guy that's near the top 15 or inside the top 15, he hasn't fared very well. If you look at his losses in his career, he's lost to John Fitch, he's lost to Jung Hyun Kim, he's lost to Nat Brown, he lost to Neil Magny. The only real, I wouldn't consider a bad loss because I think Talib is a solid competitor, but as far as not being near the top 15, that was Norib Tallin back at UFC 196, where he got knocked out in the 2nd round. That's really the only loss that doesn't really fit the mold. He also does have a disqualification loss, if you don't want to really count that. That was actually in his UFC debut against Carlo Prater at UFC 142. That was about 5 years ago. So I think that Silva definitely has all the qualities to beat Yancy Medeiros. He definitely has the skill. Really, it's going to be kind of who lands that punch first, who lands that takedown first, who asserts their will, because I think that both these guys are very similar. They're flashy, they have a lot of finishes, and they're both kind of tall, they're lankier guys, they like to go out there and perform. And I think this is a fun fight. This is a great fight to kick off the card. And I think this is a hard fight to pick because I wouldn't consider Medeiros an elite talent, but he has looked, I mean, it's only one fight, so it's not a huge sample size to say that this guy is going to be huge or the next big thing at 170. But Erik Silva is a guy that you can say is, well, maybe he's on the downside of his career. He's not going to get to that potential a lot of people thought he would a few years ago, now being 32, taking a couple losses to some of the better guys in this division. You know, does he have enough left in to make a climb back up those rankings? I don't know. But right now, Yancy Medeiros is, I would say, maybe the more hungry of the individual looking to prove himself here at this new weight class and against a guy who definitely is somewhat of a stepping stone in the welterweight division. If you can get past Erik Silva, that definitely shows that you're ready to take on more elite competition. Looking at the next fight of the evening, this is going to be at middleweight as Olule Bambus, also known as the Holy War Angel, will take on Paula Borchaina. And if I remember correctly, Borchaina had a very impressive last fight, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he had a very devastating knockout. I'm going to double check that here. Whereas Bambus, he is definitely a guy that's a very powerful individual. Of his 6 victories, all of them are by knockout. So far in the UFC, just 1-2. Does have a knockout victory over Daniel Sarafian at UFC Fight Night 83. His losses coming to Cesar Ferreira and Uriah Hall. And really, with the Holy War Angel, it's going to be, can he keep the fight standing? If it stays standing, he definitely has the power to knock out any individual in this division. Obviously, his weakness is the grappling game. We definitely saw that against Cesar Ferreira. Really, against Uriah Hall, that was his UFC debut. I believe it was short notice, if I'm not mistaken. And Uriah Hall is just a very dynamic striker. You know, I don't hold a lot of stock in that. Maybe with a full camp, he probably still loses, but I think maybe it's a little more competitive now that he kind of has the UFC jitters out of his system. But if I was Paulo, I would think that the ground game may be something willing to try, despite him being a huge knockout artist in his own right. 9 victories, 8 knockouts. That's 14 between them. He also does have 1 submission victory. And, yeah, I was correct. He knocked out Gareth McClellan in just 1:17 in his debut back in March at UFC Fight Night 106. And this is a not a very tall individual at 6 foot, but very stocky, very built. Just about an inch taller than the Holy War Angel. And as much as I like to think, oh, maybe try the ground, that's probably not going to happen. That's wishful thinking here. I think these two guys are going to bang. It's going to be exciting. Don't blink in this one. Somebody's going to land first. They're going to go crash into the canvas. It's going to be awesome. Man, obviously I'll give my pick here in a minute, but this is going to be another really fun fight, another fight where anything's going to happen, and I think it's going to be just a straight-up brawl between the Holy War Angel and Mr. Paulo Enrique Borchaina. I probably said that wrong, but I try. Getting to the next fight of the evening, it's going to be also in the middleweight division, as Vitor Belfort will take on Nate Marquardt. A lot of people are talking about this as Vitor Belfort's retirement fight. However, I think there is some possibility that while this is Vitor Belfort's last fight in the UFC, it's not his last fight in mixed martial arts. I don't know if this is true. This could just be me speaking out my butt. But I do think that there is a possibility that Vitor Belfort will fight in Rizin and Japan again by proxy. The reason I say that is because, of course, Japan has a looser guidelines in regards to certain substances you can use, and Vitor Belfort has stressed wanting a Legends division in the UFC or in mixed martial arts. I don't know how close the UFC is to doing that. I don't really see that happening. He could go to Bellator possibly, but I have a feeling that this might not be his last UFC fight, especially if he wins. I say that because that may give him, whether that's a false sense of confidence or a good thing moving forward, I'm not sure, but I have a feeling, just an inking suspicion, that this may not be Vitor Belfort's last fight. But if it is, as fans of this show may know, if you've been following me throughout the years, I'm a huge fan of Vitor Belfort, and he's definitely been one of my favorites to watch, and he's definitely been a very exciting individual. He's always brought it inside the octagon or the ring in Pride or wherever he has competed in mixed martial arts, and if this is indeed the end, I definitely will be a little sad, because few have done the things that he's done before in the octagon, has beaten some of the guys that he's beaten before in this sport. Obviously, being a UFC tournament champion, also he won the light heavyweight championship as well, and guy who's competed at several different weight classes, has been a very game individual, and like I said, has always been entertaining to the sport, and definitely a guy that will be missed if this indeed is his last mixed martial arts bout. Now, actually looking at the bout itself, even though Vitor is definitely on the last stages of his career, Nate Marquardt is a guy that's in a very similar situation, a guy that a few years ago did try fighting in the welterweight division, did capture the Strikeforce welterweight title. That was back in July of 2012. But really since then, and he did have a suspension, I believe, before that, after his fight, I believe, against Dan Miller, really is a guy that, regardless of the weight class, really hasn't found success that he had early on in his career in Pancrase, and obviously in the UFC at one point did fight for the UFC middleweight championship. Since defeating Tyron Woodley in July of 2012, he has only won 3 fights and has lost, I believe, 7. So 3-7 in his last 10, and he's gotten knocked out pretty bad in some of those fights. Look at the Jake Ellenberger fight, the Hector Lombard fight, the Kelvin Gastelum fight, the Thiago Santos fight. He definitely has looked pretty bad. He does, however, he was able to get a victory over James T. Hunna, C.B. Dalloway, and Tamdim McRory in that span. His most recent fight, he lost a very close fight to Sam Alvey back at UFC on Fox 23, and in that fight against Sam Alvey, it definitely showed that he's a guy that doesn't really want to strike anymore. Maybe it was just Sam Alvey, but was really forcing the issue with the grappling department. And that's good and bad for Vitor. It's good because if Vitor lands a couple of shots early, that's what he's known for, he could put this thing to bed quickly. But Vitor most recently has shown that if the fight goes to the ground and he's on his back, that he just has nothing to offer his opponent. So if Nate can get this fight to the ground, can be on top, he has a very strong possibility not just to get a win, but to get a finish as well. And that would be huge to not only stun the crowd there in Brazil, but to not allow Vitor to go out the way he wants. So Nate Marquardt would be playing the ultimate spoiler here, but that's really got to be his strategy. He has to be able to get inside, not get hit or deflect the damage enough to get inside the clinch and take this fight to the ground. Because if he can get it there, I think very easily he can finish this fight. Because like I said, Vitor it doesn't look like he wants to do anything with the ground and just almost gives up. That's kind of what he's been doing lately. But if it stays on the feet, and the longer it does so, the chances increase that Vitor could land something. And the way Nate Marquardt has performed over his last 10 fights, that very likely can end in a devastating knockout. The next fight of the evening in the co-main event in the women's strawweight division, Claudia Gedaliah will take on Karolina Kovitch. This is a matchup of 2 former title contenders. Of course, both have lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Gedaliah has now lost to the champion twice, just once for Kovitch, who is also a woman from Poland as well. And because both have already fought Joanna and pretty recently and have lost, both really kind of getting dominated, even though this is a matchup of the number 2 and number 1 girls in the class, I don't think the winner will get a title shot. Now, if Kovitch wins, you can maybe start kind of putting that out there because a lot of people are talking about Rose Namajunas possibly getting a shot, and she does have a win over Rose Namajunas. That wasn't that long ago, just about a year ago at UFC 201. So that is a factor. And obviously, Gedaliah has already fought Joanna twice, has lost twice, and the fight was only about a year ago. She does have a win over Courtney Casey, but I'm not sure the win over Kovitch, as good as it would be for Gedaliah in her career, if it would give her the next title shot, because I'm not sure if the UFC wants to book a third fight between Joanna and Claudia, at least right now. You also add in the UFC looks to be forming a women's flyweight division. Gedaliah has notoriously had some trouble with her weight, making the 115 weight class, and obviously in her second fight against Joanna, you can tell conditioning was one of the big factors why she didn't win that fight, because she could not go longer than about 10 minutes, despite dominating those first 10 minutes. And if that 125 weight class opens up, which it looks as though it will, you could see Claudia jump up to 125, which may suit her better, not having to cut those 10 extra pounds. So having a win over Kovitch, even though at a lower weight class, would do her a lot of help moving up a weight class, if that is what she wanted to do. I don't know. We'll see. But I think that is a strong possibility for Gedaliah. Again, you also factor in she's already lost to the champion twice. Now, the big story of this fight, I think, is very similar to Gedaliah against Jędrzejczyk. I think if it goes to the ground, Gedaliah is going to have a considerable advantage against the woman from Poland. But if it stays standing, got to give the advantage to Kovitch. However, Kovitch has very good takedown defense, and I think she's proved that in several of her UFC bouts, really starting with her debut against Randa Markos, where she was able to continually stop the takedowns of Randa Markos. And then against Heather Clark, completely dominated. Heather Clark had a good first round, but after that, she really took over back in May of 2016. And then against Rose did have her moments, but again, was able to stop the takedown, and the big thing in that fight was the clinch. You saw the Muay Thai striking of Kovitch really come out in that fight against Rose because she was stopping those takedowns. The fight went in the clinch, and Carolina was more than willing to strike inside the clinch and did a very good job in that. I think that's one of the reasons why she got that split decision victory at UFC 201. And if Gedaliah has trouble taking her down and finds herself inside the clinch, that's not a great position because she has proven that she can strike inside the clinch. And also a girl that I think has really good conditioning. Despite losing that fight against Joanna, I mean, was in there. It wasn't from being tired, it was just from being a little bit outmatched. But this is a girl that definitely is a very talented individual, definitely has, I think, the better conditioning of the two. And when that fight gets into the third round in the deeper waters, I would look for Carolina to be the fresher of the two fighters. And I think that is a huge X factor in this fight, is how conditioned will Claudia be for this fight, and will she burn out at all? If takedowns aren't successful, she really has to work and use strength instead of technique and leverage to get the fight where she wants it to be. I think that's a huge factor, and that really does play into me possibly picking Carolina. I'll get to those picks here in just a minute. Gotta get to that main event first. UFC 212 main event for the undisputed featherweight championship of the world, as interim champion Max Holloway will take on Jose Aldo, the featherweight champion. This will be the first defense for Aldo since re-becoming the featherweight champion after Conor McGregor, the champion, vacated or stripped, however you want to use that. And Jose Aldo, who was the interim champion at the time, was promoted. This fight, Jose Aldo was trying to get a rematch with Conor McGregor. Of course, doesn't look like that's going to happen at any weight class. And with that, him being injured, I use that in quotes because he's had a lot of injuries over the years. So a matchup, and also the loss of Rumble Johnson and Daniel Cormier, the matchup between Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis, which was the co-main event of UFC 206, elevated to main event status, and thus entered a interim title tag in efforts to kind of save that card, although I don't think that was really needed. However, Max Holloway competed that night, won, dominated Anthony Pettis. Pettis had no answer for the Hawaiian, who just seemed to be able to strike and stop the takedown when he wanted to, and was able to get the finish over I think not only maybe an outskilled opponent, but maybe a guy that was mentally not all there as well. And Max Holloway is nothing but a mentally strong individual. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that's a huge factor in this fight. Now, even though Jose Aldo has 26-2, had a streak of not losing for like 10 years, is a guy that's beaten everybody, but Conor McGregor at 145 pounds has done so pretty spectacularly in a lot of instances, having 14 knockout finishes among his 26 victories, beating a who's who in the featherweight division, including Cub Swanson, Mike Brown, Mark Hominick, Kenny Florian, Chad Mendez twice, the Korean Zombie, Ricardo Lamas, and Frankie Edgar twice. This is a guy who I believe will be a UFC Hall of Famer when he decides to call it a career. But I think losing to Conor McGregor and losing the way he did, considering the hype and how many times that fight got like scheduled and rebooked and everything, and now the fact that Conor's chasing huge paydays now against Floyd Mayweather, whether that fight's going to happen or not, that's what he's chasing right now, and knowing that he's probably never going to get a chance to get that loss back. That could affect a guy in Jose Aldo coming into a fight where you got this young, hungry kid in Max Holloway, a dude that hasn't lost in a few years, is on one of the biggest winning streaks ever in the UFC. It started coincidentally right after his loss to Conor McGregor in January of 2014, and he's beat some of the who's who in this division as well. Cub Swanson, Charles Oliveira, Jeremy Stevens, Ricardo Lamas, and Anthony Pettis. And really in this span has made it look pretty easy. I don't think there's one fight in this span that you can say, maybe other than the Charles Oliveira fight because that was a weird injury, but I would say every fight he has been dominant and has either got the decision win, no question, or has finished his opponent. And right now, with the way he's rolling, with the way he is mentally, where's Jose Aldo at mentally? I don't know. This is a guy who has had some problems, I think, with the mental game. And we all know in the past that if it seems that his opponent not at his level, we've seen some fights where he hasn't looked that great, but he's just better than his opponent. I mean, you can look at the Ricardo Lamas fight. I even think the Korean Zombie fight a little bit, he did that. It just seems where fights where he's not 100% up for, kind of almost like Anderson Silva in a sense, if you go back to some of Anderson Silva's style fight, just some fights you could tell it wasn't the same dude. And even though this is in Brazil, this is a chance to kind of reclaim his legacy, I'm not sure if this is a dude that's all there. And as quick as he has been in his career, as fast as he has been, explosive he has been, he is now 30 years old and has 28 professional fights and has had a host of injuries throughout about the last 5 years of his career too. And now enter this young, fresh kid who's long, who's lanky, who's an incredible striker, who's very dynamic, who's a tough individual as well, and seems to be poised and ready for being a champion, to get on the big time, to not only take this title, but run with it for years. And, I know that's not a huge technical breakdown by me, but I think that's a huge thing in this fight, and that's a big factor in this fight. And while Jose Aldo is still a very solid individual, and I think he's the better individual if this fight goes to the ground, he has amazing takedown defense, and I would say is the better jiu-jitsu practitioner. Max Holloway's not a big takedown guy. However, Aldo's not a guy that really seeks the takedown out either. However, I think that's an X factor in this fight if Aldo wanted to take that down, because in what I've seen of Max Holloway, that may be the key to beat him, is trying to tie him up, get him into grappling situations, make him work, not allow him to use that long and lanky frame and reach, and obviously I think tremendous hand speed, and he throws a lot of punches and bunches too. He puts incredible output out there. He's not a one-shot knockout power guy, but the shots are going to keep coming, and they're going to be very technically sound. He doesn't leave a lot of openings Of course, there was that moment, though, where he just pointed to the ground and fought those last 10 seconds there with Ricardo Lamas. But this is a guy who knows how to not get hit. And I think at this stage of your career, he's just as fast, maybe even faster than Jose Aldo now, or maybe ever was. And I think that's a huge factor in this fight where Aldo has relied a lot on his hand speed in previous fights. So I look for that there. Conditioning-wise, Aldo has held up pretty well over 25 minutes, but again, like I said, a little older, has had some injuries. It's always been a tough weight cut for him, and I would favor the conditioning to Max Holloway. So I think if Jose Aldo gets frustrated or he's not finding the level of success that he's used to, through the first 3 rounds, will he still be able to turn it up against Max Holloway, who's a guy that just seems to get better as the fight goes on? He really fights on a moving up arc or pie chart or stock graph or however you want to say that analogy. But this is a guy that always seems to get better and improve upon what he did. And a guy that's just very technically sound. And this could be his time to be the best fighter, not only at 145, but one of the best fighters in the world. With that said, let's get to my picks here for UFC 212, Aldo versus Holloway from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Saturday, June 3rd, on pay-per-view, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Looking at the first fight of the evening in the welterweight division, Erik Silva against Yancy Medeiros. Gonna go Yancy Medeiros. I'm really impressed with this guy since moving up to 170, albeit a small sample size. I think that he's going to have the technical skills to beat Erik Silva. I think he's a little more technical of a striker, but this is going to be a fun fight. Erik Silva definitely is a very game individual, and I think something's crazy is going to happen. I don't think this is going to be a boring fight. I'm really looking forward to this one. Next fight also going to be crazy, but crazier in a different way. These are just 2 strong dudes who just throw bombs. Somebody's going to connect, and somebody's going to be unconscious on the canvas. Who's it going to be? I think the guy throwing the deadly blow, is going to be the Brazilian Paulo Barciana, and I just think that he hits the mark a little more. I know he's fought in the UFC once, but I think fighting the home country pumps him up. Gonna go with the Brazilian in this one. Vitor Belfort against Nate Marquardt. I would say, yeah, Nate Marquardt has the skills, can get this fight to the ground, but Nate Marquardt has looked pretty bad in his recent fights, maybe even worse than Vitor Belfort has been, because you can make a case at least Vitor Belfort has been fighting elite competition. If this is indeed his last fight, I think he's going to pull out all the stops to go out here in Brazil, in Rio, his hometown. I think he gets it done and goes out on top. If he decides to fight in Rizin, I'm going to watch those fights too, but I think he's going to go out his UFC career a winner, and I'm going to pick Vitor Belfort over Nate Marquardt. Claudia Gedaliah against Carolina Kovitch. Going Kovitch in this one. I think she has the better conditioning. She is tough to take down, and if those takedowns get stopped and the fight goes into clinch, she's a very good clinch striker, and I think that's going to be the difference. And even though it's 1 against 2, it's not a huge upset, an upset of sorts here, and I do think Kovitch will walk away the winner. Jose Aldo against Max Holloway. Going with Max Holloway in this one. I believe that this is his time. He's on the bigger role. He's hungry. He's young. I think he's mentally ready for this challenge of Jose Aldo, and I don't think Aldo, he's quite there anymore. He's not the same guy that was the dominant champion anymore. I don't think he's completely done in his career, but I think this is Max Holloway's time, and I think we're going to see him capture the undisputed featherweight championship on Saturday. And I'll even add a prediction. I usually don't do this, is how the fight's going to go, but I actually think we're going to see a 4th round knockout by Max Holloway. How about that? Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and joining me today on the line, we have a special guest. He will be making his UFC debut at UFC 212. He is Marlon Moraes. And Marlon, thanks for coming on Beyond the Cage.
Thank you so much, man, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Now, of course, Marlon, you fought for several years for the World Series of Fighting, was the champion over there, one of the best fighters not in the UFC for several years. Now you finally are going to be making your Octagon debut. How good does it feel to finally step foot inside the UFC?
like I said before, it's a dream coming true, and I can't wait, man. I can't wait to go out there Saturday night and perform, man. Put on a great performance and be the best Marlon you guys ever seen inside a cage.
Your opponent on Saturday is Rafael Assuncao, and he's currently ranked number 3 in the UFC. Is that the fight you wanted, somebody in the top 5, somebody that was going to challenge you, Marlon?
Yeah, man, that's perfect. I'm ready, and I've been training for a long time. I've been fighting for a long time. I already know what it takes to get there, and I'm ready, man. I'm ready to go out there and then face the best of the best.
Now, looking at Assuncao in his last fight, he did get the victory over Aljamain Sterling, but in my opinion, he looked a little off, didn't look as fast as he used to be, and he didn't look to be throwing a lot of punches and bunches like he had been before his injury. Do you feel as though that your speed with your hands, and especially your leg kicks, is going to be a big difference in this fight?
Man, I'm ready for the best Rafael Assuncao. We train for the best Rafael that ever stepped in the cage. I know he's a great fighter. He can fight everywhere. He always finds a way to win the fights. But Saturday night's gonna be me, man. Saturday night's my night. I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna perform, and I'm gonna win the fight.
Now, for fans that may not be familiar with you coming from WSOF, what would you say can they expect from you come Saturday night? What can they expect from Marlon Moraes?
Please expect the unexpectable, because I'm coming, I'm ready, and I can't wait to be in there and just perform, man. Just do what I do every day, training, and what I've been doing in the last couple of years.
Now, of course, early on in your career, I know you fought in Brazil before, but it's been a while since you've fought in Brazil. Obviously, now going to fight in Rio de Janeiro, so that's got to be fun for you to make your debut and have it be in Brazil, right?
Yeah, very fun, man. I'm back home, and I'm in the UFC, so I'm where I belong, and I can't wait for Saturday night. Go out there and do what I love, man. Enjoy every second of the fight and be in the cage, feel the energy and let go everything I have on myself.
Now, this fight looks to be delayed. It looks like champion Garbrandt has a slight injury that's going to affect his matchup against TJ Dillashaw, but that matchup should be happening sometime this year. Obviously, your division 135. What do you think is going to happen between Cody and TJ when they finally step inside the cage against each other?
I don't know, man. They are both great fighters, and who fights better, who's in a better day, who's going to win. Doesn't matter who wins. I just want to focus on my fight Saturday night and keep working my way to one day get my shot out there.
Now, speaking of title shots, obviously, as I mentioned, Assuncao is the number 3rd ranked fighter in the UFC at 135 pounds. Does the victory over him, do you feel that puts you on a very short list to get a title shot, or do you think it's going to be a few fights before you get that opportunity?
I want to just be in the mixed. I want to be in the mixed. I want to keep fighting the top, and the day the UFC thinks I deserve something better, I'm going to be ready for.
Now, for this training camp in particular, is there anything you've been working on, or you kind of just been doing the same thing you have been doing the last year?
Everything, man. We work everything, every single aspect of the game. We've been training very hard, and we've been improving, and I can't wait to Saturday night show to everybody.
Now, the main event of UFC 212 is Jose Aldo against Max Holloway for the Undisputed Featherweight Championship. What do you think is going to happen in that fight, Marlon?
It's a very tough fight, good matchup. I think Holloway is one of the best. Aldo's one of the best. And I think Aldo's going to win, He's fighting home. He's the man out here, man. Everybody cheering for him. And as a Brazilian, I got to stick with Aldo, and hopefully he keep the belt out here. But it's a very tough fight. Could go either way.
He is Marlon Moraes. You can follow him on Twitter at @MMarlonMoraes. And Marlon, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it and look forward to your Octagon debut this Saturday from Rio.
Thank you so much, man. I can't wait.
Once again, that was Marlon Moraes right here on Beyond the Cage. Once again, thank you to everybody who tuned in live. I appreciate it. And also look out for that Marlon Moraes interview later this afternoon on this page, as well as the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. So for MMA Warriors, I'm Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.